My name is Aurora Hughes, and what happened on my son's wedding day completely changed my life forever. You see, for most of my 68 years, I believed that love, especially a mother's love, could fix anything. But that day, in a ballroom filled with flowers, music, and 130 smiling guests, I realized how wrong I was. That was the day I learned that even love has limits. Let me take you back to that moment. Sound of murmuring crowd fades in. The wedding had just ended, and the reception was in full swing. Everyone looked perfect, except me, because I had just found out the truth. My son Ethan and his new wife Juliet had spent months plotting behind my back. They wanted to take my home, the apartment I'd lived in for 40 years. They had spoken to lawyers, forged documents, and convinced people that I was too old, too fragile to handle my own affairs. All of this from my own flesh and blood. When I confronted them, Juliet tried to keep her smile, the fake one she wore so well. "Mrs. Hughes," she said sweetly, "you're overreacting. We were just trying to help." But her eyes, they gave her away. So I turned to my lawyer, Carlos, who had been silently standing beside me all evening. He opened a folder, a thick one, and began to read out loud. Effective immediately, all inheritance and financial assets, once designated for Ethan Hughes, are being redirected to charitable foundations protecting elderly victims of family abuse. For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop. Juliet's face turned pale. Ethan froze, and then she snapped, "You can't do that." Juliet screamed, "We're your family." "Family?" I repeated. "Is that what you call people who try to steal from their own mother? Who slap her in the face on her wedding day?" Yes, Juliet had slapped me, in front of everyone. People in the room gasped again. My heart was pounding, but I stood tall. Juliet's father stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Mrs. Hughes, please. Maybe we can discuss this in private." But I cut him off. "No," I said. "You chose to humiliate me publicly, so we'll finish this publicly." Carlos closed the folder and said, "All documents have been delivered. The changes take effect immediately." And with that, everything changed. Juliet collapsed into a chair, crying hysterically, her makeup smeared, her perfect white dress now stained with tears. Ethan knelt beside her, whispering something I couldn't hear, and I just stood there, feeling both heartbreak and relief. I walked toward Juliet and said quietly, "What's destroyed isn't your wedding, Juliet. It's the lies, the greed, the illusion that you can treat people like objects and never face consequences." Ethan looked up at me, his voice trembling. "Mom, please, there must be a way to fix this." I looked him in the eye for the first time in months. "There is, Ethan. You can learn, you can change, but not with my money, not with my home, and not with my inheritance." The ballroom was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Carlos whispered, "Mrs. Hughes, it's time to go." So I turned, and I walked out of that ballroom, leaving behind the music, the murmurs, and the wreckage of everything I thought family meant. That night, I didn't just lose a son. I reclaimed my dignity, but that was only the beginning, because just when I thought the worst was behind me, I discovered something far darker. Juliet and Ethan had a plan B, and it could destroy everything I had left. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my little apartment, staring at the city lights through my window. The silence was heavy, almost as if the walls were listening. I'd spent decades building a life, raising a son, trying to be the perfect mother, and now I was alone again. Or so I thought. Because what I didn't know was that Ethan and Juliet were already planning their next move. 2 days after the wedding, my lawyer, Carlos, called. Carlos, concerned, "Aurora, we need to meet. There's something you should see." When I arrived at his office, He slid a brown envelope across the table. Inside were photos, blurry but clear enough to recognize faces. It was Juliet and Ethan, standing outside my apartment building late at night, talking to a stranger in a black coat. Carlos, grim tone. They've been seen visiting your building multiple times. We think they're trying to access your storage room. The one with your late husband's documents. My heart sank. That storage room held everything. Deeds, accounts, letters, memories of a lifetime. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, that maybe Carlos was overreacting. But that night, when I went to check for myself, the lock was broken. Someone had been there. I stepped inside, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and noticed something missing. The old wooden chest my husband had left me before he passed. It was gone. Inside that chest were more than just memories. There were shares in a family company, hidden to protect me after my husband's death. If Ethan and Juliet got their hands on that, they could still take everything. That night I cried, not because of the money, but because I couldn't recognize my own son anymore. Where had I gone wrong? I had raised Ethan to be kind, to value people over possessions. But Juliet, she had turned him into someone else. Still, deep down, a small part of me wanted to believe there was hope. That maybe, just maybe, the boy I raised was still in there somewhere. The next morning, I went to the old cabin, the one my grandmother left me. It was my sanctuary. Far away from the noise, the city, the betrayal, the smell of pine, the sound of the river. It always brought me peace. But that day, I didn't go there for peace. I went there to decide my next move. Carlos had warned me, if they try anything, we'll press charges. But be careful, Aurora. Don't face them alone. I should have listened, because when I arrived at the cabin that evening, I wasn't alone. I heard footsteps behind the trees, leaves crunching, a car engine idling in the distance. I froze. Then, Juliet's voice cut through the cold air. "Hello, Mrs. Hughes. We were hoping to find you here." I turned. Juliet stood there in a long coat, her makeup gone, her expression sharp and cold. Ethan stood a few feet behind her, silent, his eyes down. "Why are you here, Juliet?" "Oh, just thought we'd settle a few family matters. You see, that chest you were keeping so secret. We found out what was inside." My heart skipped. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Those shares, they're worth millions, aren't they? They were your grandfather's legacy, not yours to steal." "Steal? Oh, Aurora, we're family. We're just taking what's ours." Ethan finally spoke. "Mom, just sign over the papers. Juliet says we can make this right. We can all benefit from it." His voice broke slightly. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew. "Ethan, look at what she's turned you into. You're asking me to give up everything your father and I worked for. For what? Greed? Comfort?" He looked away. Juliet crossed her arms. "Enough talk. You're old, Aurora. You can't stop us. Either you sign, or we'll take it another way." I didn't answer. I just looked at her, this woman who had ruined my son's soul, and said softly, "Then do what you must." Juliet scoffed. "Don't test me." And then, she stormed toward the cabin door, but as she grabbed the handle, she froze. Behind her, Carlos stepped out from the shadows. Carlos, firm, calm. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Juliet spun around shocked. "Who the hell are you?" He held up his phone, recording everything. "An attorney and a witness. You just admitted intent to commit fraud and extortion. Congratulations, Juliet. That's a felony." Juliet's face went pale. Ethan stumbled backward, panicking. "Mom, I didn't know. She told me." "It's too late." "Ethan." Police sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Carlos had already called them before we arrived. Within minutes, the flashing lights filled the forest. Officers took Juliet by the arm, reading her rights. She screamed, cursed, cried, but it was over. When they drove away, I stood there watching the taillights disappear. Ethan was left standing in the rain, shivering, broken. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know how far she'd go. You always had a choice, Ethan. You just forgot who you were." I walked up to him, placed my hand on his cheek, and said, "When you remember, I'll be waiting." And I left him there, in the rain, to face himself. Back inside the cabin, I sat down by the fire. The air smelled like pine and smoke, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Juliet was gone. Ethan had to face his choices, and I had my dignity and my freedom. But deep inside, I still felt a mother's ache, because even after all that pain, part of me still hoped my son would find his way back home. I thought that was the end of the story, but life had one more twist waiting for me, one that would test my forgiveness and my heart in ways I never imagined. It's strange how quiet life becomes after a storm. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. After the chaos of that night at the cabin, I finally found myself alone, truly alone. No calls, no messages, no more pretending, just me, the sound of the wind through the trees, and the echo of everything I'd lost. Some nights I'd sit on the porch, staring at the stars, thinking of Ethan. My son, was he eating, sleeping, trying to rebuild his life? Or was he still angry? I didn't know, and maybe I wasn't ready to know, because forgiveness, it's not something you can rush. It takes time and courage. Winter came. The cabin was cold, but I kept the fire burning. It was the only sound that reminded me I was still alive. Then one night, nearly a year after that wedding, there was a knock on my door. 3 slow, hesitant knocks. I froze. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again. When I opened the door, he was standing there. Ethan. He looked older, tired. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there before. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, soaking wet from the snow, eyes red, like he'd been crying. "Mom," he whispered. I didn't know where else to go. I should have felt anger or bitterness, but I didn't. Instead, I saw a broken boy standing in front of me. The same boy I once held in my arms when he was 5 and afraid of thunder. "Come inside," I said softly. He stepped in, shivering, his hands trembling. I handed him a towel, and for a long while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I lost everything, Mom. The house, the car, the friends, everything. Juliet filed for divorce. She's gone." He paused, voice cracking. "I kept blaming you, but now I see. You were just trying to save me from myself." Tears filled my eyes. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I found this," he said quietly, "at the storage unit, the one near the river. I think it's yours." I opened the box. Inside were my husband's old letters. The ones I thought were lost forever. His handwriting, his words, his love. Each one carried memories of a man who built our life with kindness, not money. And on top of the letters, there was a small folded note. I opened it carefully. It was written in my husband's handwriting. "If you ever lose your way, look not for riches, but for reason. Family is not who inherits your wealth. It's who inherits your heart." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The anger, the grief. It all began to fade. I looked at Ethan. His face was full of guilt, but also hope, and I realized this was my moment to choose. I could hold on to my pain, or I could let it go. I took his hand and said softly, "Ethan, you hurt me more than anyone ever could, but you're still my son. And if you're ready to rebuild, then so am I." He broke down, cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child, and I held him. not as a betrayed mother, but as a mother who finally understood that love, real love, isn't about control. It's about forgiveness. The months that followed weren't easy. Ethan started working again, this time helping elderly people with housing, the very thing he once tried to take from me. We rebuilt our bond slowly, one conversation at a time, one meal at a time. Juliet never came back, and honestly, I stopped wishing she would. Some stories don't need a perfect ending. They just need peace. Looking back now, I realized that the wedding didn't destroy my family. It revealed it. It showed me who truly loved me and who loved what I had. But more importantly, it showed me who I was. Strong, resilient, capable of walking away from pain and still choosing love. So, to anyone listening to my story tonight, if someone you love betrays you, remember this. You can forgive them without letting them break you again. You can walk away and still wish them well. You can lose everything and still find peace. Because sometimes losing people isn't the end. It's the beginning of finding yourself. My name is Aurora Hughes, and this was the day I lost everything and gained myself. People say time heals everything, but I've learned time doesn't heal, it teaches. It's been a year since that night at the cabin, since I chose to walk away from pain and from the version of myself that kept trying to fix others who didn't want to be saved. My son Ethan visits every Sunday now. We don't talk about the past much. We don't need to. He helps me fix things around the cabin. A leaky faucet, a creaky chair. But every now and then, when our eyes meet, I see it. The guilt still lingers. The lessons still sting. And yet, I also see growth. He's learning. And so am I. One morning, he brought me coffee. My favorite kind. Just the way I used to make it for him when he was a boy. He smiled shyly and said, "I got a new job, Mom, at a non-profit that helps older people keep their homes." I think Dad would have liked that. My heart swelled. It was the first time in years I'd seen that spark of pride in him. The one I thought Juliet had buried forever. After he left that day, I sat on the porch with the wooden box he'd returned to me months ago. The one with my husband's letters. I opened it again, not out of grief this time, but gratitude. There was one letter I hadn't read before. On the envelope, in my husband's handwriting, were 3 words. "For when you heal." My hands trembled as I opened it. Aurora, if you're reading this, it means you faced something that tried to break you. And if I know you, you didn't just survive. You grew stronger. Remember, love isn't proven by who stays when it's easy, but by who shows up after it's hard. You've done your part. Now live, my love. Truly live. Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from a strange, sweet relief. It felt like he was right there beside me, reminding me that my story wasn't over. It was just beginning again. I realized that day, forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they did to you. Ethan will always carry the memory of his mistakes. Juliet will live with hers. But me, I've chosen to carry peace. And that choice, that quiet decision, has made all the difference. Now every morning, I open the curtains and let the sunlight in. I make my coffee, sit by the window, and whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude. For the pain that shaped me, for the love that stayed with me, and for the strength to start again. To anyone listening to my story right now, if you've ever been betrayed, abandoned, or used, I want you to remember this. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your self-worth. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself a new beginning. And sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is forgive and move forward without ever looking back. My name is Aurora Hughes, and this was not the story of what I lost. It's the story of what I found. Myself. If Aurora's story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Solver. where real stories meet real emotions. Because every heartbreak hides a lesson worth sharing.